So, Paul, tell us about yourself. What are you doing here at COTESOL, and what do you think about COTESOL so far this weekend?
Well, it's been great. I'm excited to be here. I live in Osaka, Japan, but I used to live in Korea. I've only been to COTESOL once, and that was in 1998. So it's kind of exciting to be back. And the conference has definitely developed a lot more. It's better organized, and it's really nice to see such a big international conference here in the center of Seoul.
And what about you? What's your background in teaching and in materials development?
My main area is extensive reading. I got involved in that when I arrived in Japan about 10 years ago, and I've actually spent the last I've been teaching at university for almost 10 years in Japan. I was teaching universities in Korea and other countries before that. And I've been a big practitioner of extensive reading, which is kind of how I got to know you through the ER Foundation, ER World Congress. And now I've actually left teaching to develop my own system for extensive reading that I think will help teachers in universities in Japan and Korea and other countries to use extensive reading in their classes, make it easier for students.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to come back to this and talk about it kind of later in the conversation, but now I feel like this is the perfect time to to ask you, tell us a little bit about X reading, just by way of disclosure. I've been doing extensive reading for a long time, as you know, and I've essentially taught in a library for 4 years. We had 15,000 native speaker literature books, and then towards the end of my time there, we managed to get, in the end, about 3,000 graded readers. Many of those were donated by publishing companies that were interested in the research that I was doing. And so I taught with native speaker literature, like traditional children's books, Scholastic, those kind of companies from America. And I also taught with graded readers, which are literature that's created for language learners, as you know, graded by vocabulary frequency, rather than kind of roughly graded like a lot of language learning native speaker materials might be. For example, the classic example of non-graded text would be something like a story about a boy who loves pumpernickel, which I didn't even know what pumpernickel was. It's some kind of like rye kind of ingredient thing that goes in rye bread, but that might be in a grade 1 book for kids in a native speaker setting that they learn in a language arts class. However, pumpernickel would never ever appear in a graded reader unless it was called The Boy Who Loves Pumpernickel, and then the word probably didn't appear ever again. So basically very, very simple vocabulary at the lower levels with proper nouns, place names, things like that. And I had a lot of success with teaching with graded readers from the 100 word level right up to the 3,000 word level, 3,000 word frequency level with advanced students. And I'm, very much a believer in the power of extensive reading, as you know. And so kind of like setting you up to talk about what you're doing, I think it's really exciting what you're doing by having multiple publishers on the same platform. Could you tell us a little bit about how that all works?
Well, to step back a little bit and to agree with you 100%, I really believe graded readers are necessary. Oh, I should say before that, I think reading is ultimately the best way for students to get input, which is necessary, essential for learning a language. Reading is the best way to get input. Extensive reading, having books that are comprehensible for students is key. I think for far too long, students were expected to read books, like you were saying, with too many unfamiliar words. And there's been so much research showing that if there's unfamiliar words on the page, they're not going to understand. If you don't understand, either you have to do a lot of translation, which is slowing you down, or just get frustrated and quit. So I think while graded readers certainly aren't perfect, they are better than anything else for delivering comprehensible input to students. And that's kind of why I got into extensive reading, seeing how students could actually read a book without being frustrated. Instead of reading one page in 30 minutes, they could actually read an entire book in 30 minutes or an hour and feel like they've accomplished something and get a lot of input. At the same time, while I was doing a lot of extensive reading, I saw teachers, myself and other teachers, having a lot of problems. Managing a program, knowing if students are reading, assessing if the students are reading, keeping track of which books they had read, and at the same time, there just always seemed to be a lack of books. Or students didn't have access to books. The library either was out of books because students had already taken them all out, or the library was closed, or it was vacation time. And that gave me the idea, well, what about an online system where students, naturally something being online, students can access anytime they want. At nighttime, weekends, 24/7, they could access the books. So I thought that was the initial idea, make books more accessible to students. And then because, again, it's computer-based online, there could be a learner management system that would allow teachers to monitor what their students are doing. So it basically resolves two problems. Book access is taken care of by putting it online, and a learner management system letting teachers monitor and assess their students' reading. Again, with it online, you can see how much your students are reading, their reading speed, number of words they've read, and keep track of this over time. So I thought that would be a key thing to do. However, in order for it to be possible, I had to get content. And I didn't want any content. I wanted quality graded readers. Not that every graded reader is a perfect book. There's lots of books that aren't that good. But I knew that if this system was to be successful, I would have to negotiate with the publishers. And it was a very difficult process. It took me almost 2 years to persuade the publishers. They were very concerned about A, putting their content online, B, sharing a platform with other publishers. And I basically just had to keep showing them how they would benefit from this. And eventually, one publisher joined, and then once one joined, the others really didn't want to be left out. And within, it took almost 2 years to get our first publisher, but then within 6 months, we had 6 more publishers. We now have all the major publishers: Oxford, Macmillan, Cengage, Cambridge. Then we have some smaller publishers: Helbling, ELI, MPI, and we're negotiating with several more small and big publishers. So it's really starting to come together. We only launched in Japan in May, so it's still very new and very small. Sometimes bugs come up. We don't have a tremendous amount of users, but the users that we have are enthusiastic. And next school year in Japan, which starts in April, will probably double, triple, even quadruple the number of users we have and the number of universities we're at. So the system's been relatively successful. We're very satisfied how things are moving.
And what's your hope for Korea? Because I understand that this is not going, and this is absolutely wonderful. It's like a utopia for somebody who wants to do ER especially in a big situation. Like I was the director of studies for General Studies Department at a university and responsible for materials for a few thousand students. I would have loved to have done ER, but unfortunately I was only able to do it in the after-school institute that we ran for kids, where we were doing research with 100 students, because there wasn't anything like this. What are the, I guess, the question is kind of about what would you like to do in Korea, and what are the possibilities of something like this spreading to other places?
Good question. So the agreement, again, because the publishers were anxious about this whole online system, sharing a platform, they did eventually agree to license us their content. We have, I think, 530 books from those various publishers. However, the licenses we have from most publishers are limited only to Japan. However, the publishers said that they are potentially willing to expand to other markets if I am able to show that there is interest in the system in those countries. So that's actually one of the reasons I came here. Was to meet people interested in ER, to show them what I'm doing, and say, this is the system I've developed, this is what you can do with it, this is approximately how much it will cost. Do you think students at your school or your classes would be interested in using this? I'm going to gather that, create something called a market analysis, and present it back to the publishers and say, yes, hopefully, yes, there is interest in Korea, and these schools have indicated that if this system existed, they would be interested in using it. And hopefully then they will allow, at least for a 6-month trial period, see how things go. That will give us a chance to see how the system works in Korea. Also give a chance maybe for word to spread, and then it can expand perhaps not next academic school year, the following year.
So if you're watching this on any of my feeds, click on the link below. Maybe Jeff will put a link for you to the X Reading and check it out. And contact Paul. There'll be some contact details as well, because he is a practitioner and not a businessman. And this is something that really needs to happen, I think, in Korea, because unfortunately, ER has had a big penetration in Korea, huge, in fact. And we have had some success, but it's mostly been in private sector or in some language schools. They've created their own materials. There are people who have, real books in libraries, and they're using M-Reader or they're using other platforms to track performance, but there's nothing really like this, which is almost a turnkey solution, basically a turnkey solution. So definitely get in touch with Paul, get in touch with me if you're interested in having a pilot, for example. Perhaps next year some pilots will be possible. You were talking about that, right?
Yeah. If we can, we can give limited. I mean, if it's for a big program, then there would be some cost involved. Again, because we have to give revenue to publishers. If it's just a teacher wanting to check out the system, we can do that for free. But I think it would be a good opportunity.
Awesome.
And I was curious from your perspective, what do you think would be the challenges expanding the system in Korea?
Well, I think the problem, if you look at different sectors, the difficulties are different for different sectors. So in the university, for example, most decision makers are Koreans who are not necessarily even, their background might not even be in TESOL. It might be a language and literature major or a literature major, and they're running the TESOL department, or they're in charge of general studies only for a couple of years. So taking a risk with some sort of new platform that costs money, that might not have buy-in from everybody, is a big step for people to take. So there's definitely those kind of institutional problems and concerns about risk at the university level. I think in the younger level, I think definitely this has potential in high school and middle schools. The problem is, of course, getting the government bodies to buy into it, or particular school districts that might have, or special schools that have freedom to do this. So I think there's definitely challenges in terms of the fact that people already have a set curriculum and it's hard for them to add something to it. They don't really understand how extensive reading might work or what the gains are. I think probably the biggest problem is institutional kind of, I think making change in curriculum in Korea, probably anywhere, but especially in Korea, it's like walking through treacle, and if you're doing it and you're leading other people through treacle, you better have a pretty good old, horse and cart to help drag them through with you. It's very, very, very difficult to do change here. I think where the potential is, if I can turn that back to a positive, is there are a lot of people in all kinds of different settings who are using real book libraries to do ER now. Literally, there's probably hundreds of thousands of students doing ER in Korea in all different kinds of settings, and I think there's quite a lot of those people whose challenges with dealing with real libraries, which you've talked about, can be offset by this being an online platform with multiple publishers. I think it's an excellent way for an institution to get started without having to spend a lot of money on a book library and then have to have somebody manage their library. And I think you've talked about those problems before with managing a library.
Yeah, and that actually, in many ways, the program, in my biased opinion, is good. The system is good for any program. It's particularly good for programs that are starting out who don't have the books. Why invest, tens of thousands of dollars to buy a library worth of books when you can get much cheaper in digital and a benefit? I don't know exactly how things work in Korea, but you can actually have students pay for it because they can subscribe themselves. In Japan, I'd say about 75% of our subscribers the university pays, and 25% the students pay by buying an access card. And probably in the future, it will be more students paying for it as it becomes, replacing a textbook or a supplement to a textbook. So I think that there's certainly potential for that. And again, it really could help a program just starting out. And the other nice thing about it is, if they decide, extensive reading is not for us, they have not invested a tremendous amount of money in a huge library. They get to try it for a semester or a year or 2 years, and then can say, hopefully they'll realize, yes, this has been beneficial for our students. The amount of input they're getting is increasing, and their scores are reflecting that. But if not, for whatever reason, the subscription's finished, we're done, we're glad, we tried it. No real major loss.
So we've got a 5-minute warning light going off over the back here, and I have 2 more things we need to talk about, I guess. One is briefly cortisol. What have you thought about cortisol? Let me start and give you what's been the most interesting thing. Apart from hanging out with Paul and introducing Paul to really interesting people who are doing ER here, which has definitely been the most exciting thing for me. The second most exciting thing, I think, was seeing Scott Thornberry's plenary yesterday, and he was talking about the challenges that educators face with trying to make change, deal with change, or make change. And he's talking about problems with the McDonaldization of education and all kinds of issues that teachers face. And one of the really interesting things to me was quoting the study by S.K. Shin, came out in TESOL Quarterly 2012, talking about Korean public school teachers coming out of in-service courses, being trained in communicative approaches, being trained to teach English in English, and then going into their school setting. And on the first day, when they're doing really interactive activities, being hauled up to the principal's office and told, teach quietly. You're making too much noise. You're disturbing the other classes. What you need to understand is we do things this kind of way. You should go in and see some of the other teachers, and then it ends up becoming 85% taught in Korean, lecturing, audiolingualism. Scott set up the conditions, talking about the problems that teachers have, making change, dealing with change, being arbiters for change. And then he gave 5 very interesting examples or ways that teachers could be part of a community, could deal with those problems by writing, by not complaining. Because one of them was more interesting than what it sounds, actually. But don't complain, write about it, get involved in online communities of practice and various things like that. And I thought it was a very entertaining talk. I thought it was very timely, because people talk about these, things are changing, a lot of things are happening, but I don't think people talk enough about how difficult it is to actually make change. And for me, that segues back into ER, which has been a huge struggle for me personally and for other people who believe in ER, who know it works, to get other people to do it, especially in a mainstream setting. So that's been the most interesting thing for me. What about you?
Well, that's a lot that you found interesting.
In one thing, though. It was only one thing, yeah.
I agree. I'd rather comment on what you're saying I think that it does take a lot, for ER in general. You bring up a few different points. I think an interesting one is, the disconnect between what you learn as an educator and then what you experience when you become, or I say what you learn as you become, preparing to become an educator, and then the reality of being an educator and all the issues that come up certainly makes things difficult. In terms of what's been most impressive here at the conference, it's just the whole conference, how well it's put together, organized, how the quality of the presentations I've seen, the number of people I've met, the publisher, how big their exhibits are, much bigger than I had expected, and just overall the quality of presentations. And of course, I've been, I think I've heard some things related to that extensive reading might not be very suitable for all situations, but I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, and I found it very encouraging.
It's great.
Yeah, good.
And Jeff did ask me to. I haven't seen Jeff or talked to Jeff about what I've been doing for a while. He did ask me to say a little bit about it, and it kind of connects into ER, because I've got very interested in EL, extensive listening, and I just worked for a Korean publishing company for 2 years. We created 20 hours of graded video content using the same principles as graded readers, except we made scripts. I've spent 6 months out of the last year in the United States. We went to New Zealand. We shot in Korea as well. We shot in Hawaii. We created doco-drama, animation, drama, leveled content from about the 200 to 400 word level right up to 2,600 word level, 20 hours of graded content. And that's going to be launched in the company that I was working for pretty soon. And I've just stopped doing that, and now I'm a freelancer. So if you're looking for somebody to do something, whatever it is, after October 31st, I'm a free bird, unless Paul signs me up first.
I'm working on it. Okay. Jeff, anything you wanted to?
So I would say thanks to Jeff Lebo. Nobody does videos like Jeff Lebo. Nobody does conferences and photos. Nobody does Busan like Jeff. If you're down in Busan, definitely find him. Look below here. There's some links and stuff. Take care out there.
Yeah,
thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your Recording.
Thanks, Jeff. Keep rocking.